Hello everyone. This module we will be covering proteins. Specifically, we'll first address amino acids, their structure and polarity, essential and non-essential, standard, non-standard, complete, incomplete, as well as protein synthesis, protein structure. Then we're going to get into dynamic proteins, their transport, hormones, ones involved in muscle contraction, our static proteins, which are found that do not move, they're fixed to something. These are called extracellular matrix proteins. And then we're going to discuss dietary protein, how much we need, the recommended intake, and food sources. In the human body, proteins are a part of every cell and tissue, including our muscle. So on a dry matter basis, if we were to take away all the water within our body, approximately 50% of our body mass comes from protein. So our bodies are constantly recycling proteins on a daily basis. We refill our amino acid pool 2 to 3 times per day. And I just want you to recall that protein is a nutrient. The proteins that we eat in our diet can be used to replace broken down proteins of our own in our body in order to maintain our own homeostasis and our own protein balance. Surprisingly, many things in our body is made up of protein. Specifically, our muscle, our skin, hair, bone, neurotransmitters, enzymes, hormones, and blood proteins such as albumin and hemoglobin are proteins. So protein has an essential part of our body. If we didn't have proteins, we wouldn't survive. And so protein is way more than just muscle. It encompasses every cell of our body. Now let's refresh our memory about the structure of an amino acid. Specifically, let's go over the functional groups. On the left-hand side, we have our amine group, which is a nitrogen and 2 hydrogens. This is called the amine functional group, also known as the amino terminal for this end of the amino acid or protein. In the middle, we have our hydrocarbon, our carbon bound to a hydrogen. And then on the other side, we have our side chain, which is our carbon bound to an R, which is an arbitrary chain, which we'll discuss on the forthcoming slides. Then on the right-hand side, we have our carboxylic acid, which is our carbon with a double bond to an oxygen and a single bond to our hydroxyl group. This is called our carboxylic acid functional group, also known as our carboxyl terminal for this end of the amino acid. Again, because of the R, the side chain, we have variable composition. This may or may not contain a functional group, and we're going to get into this more as we continue on in this lecture. The R group can contribute to the properties of the amino acids and the protein depending on what it's made up of, and it determines which amino acid it is. Ultimately, this is the basic amino acid structure. We have our amine group, we have our carboxylic acid, we have our hydrocarbon, which is not a functional group, and we have our R side chain. Now let's discuss amino acids and their protein polarity. By definition, polarity means the state of having 2 opposite or contradictory tendencies. In regards to a molecule, we can have positive and negative charges at the same end. That means we have opposite charges. We have a positive and a negative occurring at the same site. So this means polarity. We have polar opposites. So the property of having poles or being polar. So what is true is that polarity, opposites, exist at both the carboxyl and the amino terminals. So if you look at the amine group, we see that the nitrogen has a negative charge and the hydrogens have a net positive charge. If we look at the carboxyl end, we see that the carbon has a positive charge. Both the oxygens have a negative charge, and the hydrogen has a positive charge. So we see polar tendencies here in regards to charge. What is also true with the amino acid is the R chain determines the overall properties of the amino acid, including the polarity. So although we have polars occurring in the amino acid structure itself, we have positive and negative charges. The side chain is what determines the overall properties of the amino acid. Amino acids are joined by peptide bonds through condensation reactions. So in this diagram at the top, we have amino acid 1 interacting with an amino acid 2. We see the reaction here is the removal of water, which is highlighted in blue. The reaction occurs between the carboxyl end of one amino acid and the amine end, or amine terminal of the subsequent amino acid. What we have is the removal of water, and then we have a new peptide bond formed between the carbon of amino acid 1 and the nitrogen of amino acid 2. This new bond is called a peptide bond. When we're creating a polypeptide, like at the bottom, we see multiple peptide bonds formed between repeating amino acids. But remember, one end of this polypeptide will always have an amino terminal, and the opposite end will be the carboxyl terminal. This is the formation of a large polypeptide. So through the process of digestion, we break down a food into their individual amino acids. And then depending on the DNA sequencing, we will build polypeptides within the body for which we need for a function. This means that we have repeating peptide bonds between amino acids. That is an anabolic reaction. To refresh our memory on the unit of biomolecules, we will recall the linkages between amino acids and what molecules they form. So amino acids, again, are joined via condensation reactions, forming peptide bonds. When we have 2 or 3 amino acids together, we have either a di, meaning 2, or a tri, meaning 3 peptides linked together. This is coined as a dipeptide and a tripeptide. When we have 4 to 50 amino acids bound together or strung together in a linear line, this is called an oligopeptide. Multiple, which is 50 plus linear amino acids, so this is in a straight line, linked together through peptide bonds, this is called a polypeptide. When we have multiple folded polypeptides, which is hundreds to thousands of amino acids, this is known as a biological protein. So remember, biological proteins that have a function within the body have to be folded. That a folding of a polypeptide creates a biological protein that has a specific function. Folding gives a protein its function. Referring to the figure on the left-hand side, we see at the bottom a linear polypeptide. Once the linear polypeptide folds into a complex three-dimensional biological protein, it now has a function. If it stays as a linear polypeptide, it is not in a functional form. In this case, we need to fold it and create a three-dimensional biological protein that carries out a function within the cell. This only happens based on the DNA sequencing that's coming and telling the protein to fold. Now we're going to discuss our essential and non-essential amino acids. So essential amino acids are listed on the left-hand side of this table. The body cannot produce these amino acids, and so you must get them from your diet. So it's isoleucine, leucine, lysine, phenylalanine, all these valine, arginine, and histidine. The key here is we see asterisks beside arginine and histidine. These are only essential in children, and this is because the metabolic pathway that synthesizes these amino acids is not fully developed in children, but in adults it is. And so arginine and histidine are non-essential for adults, but they're essential amino acids for children. There are 20 total amino acids. 8 to 10 of them are essential, depending on if you're a child or an adult. As an adult, we only have 8 essential amino acids. As a child, we include arginine and histidine, and so there are 10 essential amino acids for children. On the right side, we see our non-essential. So remember, non-essential means that the body can synthesize these amino acids on their own. So we do not need to get them from the diet. One way to remember the essential and non-essential amino acids is by using acronyms or mnemonics. One that I like to use is any help in learning these little molecules proves truly valuable. So the capitals of each word indicates the amino acid. So A for any would mean arginine. H for help would mean histidine. I for in would mean isoleucine. L for learning is lysine or leucine, and so on. So this is one way that you can help yourself remember the essential. So Basically, you need to either remember the essential or non-essential. I always try to remember the essential because these are the ones that you need to be getting from your diet. And once you know one, then through the process of elimination, you'll know what ones are non-essential when you see a list. Alternatively, you could use PVT Tim Hall as a way. So P being phenylalanine, V meaning valine, T is tryptophan, and then so on for Tim and for Hall. But using these acronyms or mnemonics will help you be able to memorize or know the essential amino acids. As stated on the previous slide, here's a simple mnemonic to help you remember the essential amino acids. I like to use PVT, Tim, Hall. PVT standing for phenylalanine, valine, and trinonin. Tim, and then Hall to represent the other amino acids. You will need to know these, so I suggest that you either use the PVT, Tim, Hall, or use the mnemonic. Any help in learning these little molecules proves truly valuable. I want us to now look at a nutrition label for a protein supplement. When you know your essential amino acids, so we wrote them on the side here, PVT, Tim, Hall, you look at the nutrition label with a new lens. You can see the essential amino acids are listed, but also within those essential amino acids are the non-essential amino acids, which are also integrated in this formula. So be careful with this. Remember, you need the essential amino acids for your body and not the non-essential amino acids. Your body produces the non-essential ones on their own for what we need. So ensure that if you are taking a dietary protein supplement, that the supplement is providing the essential amino acids and not just the non-essential amino acids. Because what happens is your kidney will filter any excess amino acids, so any excess of the non-essential amino acids, will filter it out and it will be found in your urine, making for expensive pee since you purchased the supplement. So I challenge you this week to check the nutrition label of a dietary supplement you are taking to ensure it has the essential amino acids and that it's not just providing you with non-essential amino acids, which will provide excess in your body and you'll just pee it out. Now let's discuss amino acid classification. Classification is concerned with two aspects. Firstly, side chain polarity, and secondly, the side chain pH, whether it's acidic, basic, or neutral. Polarity, as you can see, it's the fourth column to the right. Side chain polarity, we have nonpolar, polar, nonpolar, polar, all of these. Polarity of the amino acid affects the overall structure of a protein. So when something is nonpolar, that means the electrons are shared equally between atoms, and therefore there's no charge. So nonpolar means no charge. If the side chain polarity is polar, so we see some amino acids that have a polar side chain, this means that we have both a positive and a negative charge. And this polarity affects the overall structure of the protein. Now let's discuss our nonpolar amino acids. There are 10 of them. As we can see here, there's quite a few. And the side chain is indicated in purple. So that's the R group is the side chain, and they're indicated in purple. And overall, the nonpolar have side chains that are mostly composed of hydrocarbons. So that's carbon and hydrogens. And they have a net neutral charge. There's no charge associated with those side chains. So remember, we said that the side chain dictates the overall characteristics of the amino acid. So although we see the amino or the amine group having a positive charge, and we see the carboxyl side having a net negative charge, these are outweighed by the neutral characteristics of the side chain. So although we see a positive and negative charge at each end of the amino acid, this is outweighed by the neutral state of the R chain. Okay, so these are considered nonpolar. So the electrons are shared equally between atoms, and therefore there's no charge. And so in order to remember these, I've developed the mnemonic, Grandma always visits London in May to crash Paul's party. So G meaning glycine, A alanine, V valine, London is stands for leucine. In for the I is isoleucine. M is methionine. T for tryptophan. C for cysteine. P for proline. And the last P being phenylalanine. So if you remember this mnemonic, it will certainly help in remembering what the nonpolar amino acids are. Now let's discuss the polar amino acids, and as you can see, there are 5 of them. Polar meaning that there's a charge associated with the side chain. In this case, we have a positive and a negative charge of the side chain. So remember, the side chain is indicated in purple. So we see that there's some hydrocarbons. We also see that there's a hydroxyl group. In some of them, we see an amine group. So the polar, they have polar functional groups as the side chain. Can also occur in both an ionized, which means an acidic and basic pH, and non-ionized, so neutral pH forms. And in order to remember these polar neutral amino acids, I always remember the mnemonic special treats tame African gorillas. So you can use the capital of each of those words to indicate the amino acid. So you can develop your own mnemonic if that works best. I find the mnemonics really help me remember which amino acids are nonpolar, polar, or neutral. So just as a reminder, amino acids are classified based on 2 things. Its polarity, whether it's polar or nonpolar, and its pH, whether it's neutral, basic, or acidic. So now we're carrying on from the previous slide where we identified the amino acids that are polar. The amino acids on this slide are also polar. That means that the side chain has a positive and negative charge. But we're also defining which ones are basic and acidic. So on the left-hand side here, we see the basic amino acids. So these are polar basic amino acids. So they carry in the side chain a positive charge. And this is mostly due to the fact that they have the amine group. So we see NH3, we see NH2, we see NH. These all carry a net positive charge. So these are considered basic polar amino acid side chains. And the way that I remember these 3 is with the mnemonic hearts always love. Hearts stand for histidine, arginine is always, and lysine is love. And then if we move to the right, we have our polar acidic amino acid side chains. So we see that they're polar. They have positive and negative charges, but they're also acidic because they have a carboxylic acid that carries a net negative charge. So remember, the side chain dictates the characteristics of the entire amino acid. Okay, and there's 2 of them. You can see them here, and the mnemonic I use is always grateful to remember those 2. So remember, amino acids are classified depending on that R side chain. That the R side chain can either be polar or nonpolar, and it can have a difference in pH. It can be neutral, basic, or acidic. And these characteristics are very important. You need to remember these, and so these mnemonics I hope will help you in order to memorize these. Now let's discuss complete versus incomplete protein sources. I'm sure you've heard this before. You've heard the media say that this is a complete protein source. And so let's define that a little bit more. So a complete protein contains all of the essential amino acids, and it's typically animal protein. So a complete protein is named just that because it will contain all of the essential amino acids our body needs to repair and grow. So these protein sources are animal-based and include meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and cheese. And so there's also something, when we have complete, we also have incomplete protein. So these are foods that contain protein but are missing some of the essential amino acids. And typically plant proteins are considered incomplete. However, vegetarians can still get all the essential amino acids by eating a variety of plant-based protein sources. So this is the whole idea about food pairing, that you combine food groups to get the essential amino acids. So maybe one food group is incomplete, but another food group that you pair with it in a meal provides the essential amino acids that are lacking in the initial food group that you were eating. So foods like rice and dry beans contain protein, but may not have all the essential amino acids our bodies need. However, when we combine them together, these two foods can provide adequate amounts of all the essential amino acids, making your meal a complete protein source. One plant-based protein that is complete is quinoa, and quinoa is a grain. However, it does have all the essential amino acids in it. Now let's talk about an example of an amino acid, specifically tryptophan. So tryptophan, as you can see, it says L-tryptophan up at the top of the slide. We can see that from L-tryptophan, we get quite a few different hormones and neurotransmitters within the body, as well as some vitamin bases. So L-tryptophan is the basis for making serotonin, which is a vasoconstrictor and a neurotransmitter, which from serotonin, we can now, if we go further down on the slide, we can actually make melatonin, which is the hormone involved in circadian rhythms. As well, if we look to the right, we see the different pathway of L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan can be actually made into a component of vitamin B, which is niacin, which is essential for metabolism. So tryptophan is one of our essential amino acids. It gets into the brain through the blood-brain barrier to create serotonin and then melatonin. So we need the serotonin, that vasoconstrictor and neurotransmitter, and we need melatonin to help in our circadian rhythms and helping with sleep patterns. So this is a very important essential amino acid. Funny enough, gram for gram, cheddar cheese actually contains more tryptophan than turkey does. So the whole idea that after a turkey dinner, you should feel more tired, well, it could be true, but it could be also a placebo effect, that cheddar cheese actually has more tryptophan than turkey does. So this is an example of how effective an essential amino acid is. If we're not getting enough tryptophan, then it will impact serotonin, it will impact melatonin, and our sleep patterns, as well as it will affect our body's ability to have vitamin B and the action of vitamin B, specifically niacin. Now I want to discuss another essential amino acid group, and this is called the branched chain amino acids. And it's composed, this group is composed of three essential amino acids: valine, leucine, and isoleucine. And you may have heard a huge hype about BCAAs and supplementing with them. So research has shown that they do help in the recovery process in regards to protein synthesis. So shown to aid in the recovery from exercise with respect to not only protein synthesis, but also aiding in replacing our muscle glycogen and delaying fatigue, or our DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness associated with exercise. So we have an RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance of leucine, and isoleucine, and valine is also suggested, so we need these each day. And as we age, our ability to absorb leucine decreases. So this is why it's so important for older individuals to have a higher amount of protein in their diet to ensure they're getting enough leucine. So supplementation of BCAAs is unnecessary for people with a sufficiently high protein intake. So if you're getting enough protein, you don't have to supplement with BCAAs. If anything, any excess in your body will get urinated out or it gets stored as fat. So you need to be conscious of that. For aging populations, though, supplementation might be necessary because our ability to absorb leucine is affected. So while isoleucine induces glucose uptake into the cells, further research is needed to determine the role of valine in regards to the BCAA supplement. For people with low dietary protein intake, using a supplement of BCAAs can promote muscle protein synthesis and increase muscle growth over time, specifically in an aging population. So the hype and the current research is all about during exercise. Should we be supplementing with BCAAs for very long, prolonged exercise? So this is when I'm talking about greater than 2 hours of exercise. So what the research has shown is supplementing with BCAAs prevents a serum decline in these branched chain amino acids, which occurs during exercise. So a serum decline would normally cause a tryptophan influx into the brain, which would be followed by serotonin production, which may induce fatigue. And so the idea is that supplementation may help prevent fatigue in novice athletes. However, the research on BCAAs during exercise is quite unconfirmed. Some studies show that it has a benefit, while others show that it doesn't have a benefit. What is consistent, however, is that BCAAs supplementation post-exercise can help improve recovery from eccentric loading, specifically to reduce DOMs after exercise. This concludes our first mini lecture on protein.